So I'm Alex. We're sitting in the beautiful new Sixth Form Centre, Grove. I'm sitting with Toria, who's composed a piece especially for the grand opening. And I'm just going to ask some questions about the piece. So did any of the elements of the Quaker ethos of the school inspire you for it?
Absolutely, actually, yes. When I was asked to do this, I was asked to think very deeply about the Quaker values and the themes that come up in Quakerism. So I did a lot of research into Quaker texts, and I was thinking particularly of the themes of friendship, and of course, but also silence. And those are the two biggest themes. My dear friend Matthew, who asked me to do this, said, if you can incorporate those two themes most of all, that would be really good. But I was also thinking simplicity, serenity, all of the Quaker values were absolutely uppermost in my mind, yes.
Another one of my questions was, how did you incorporate maybe thoughts of like silence in your piece?
Yes, that's a very good question. It is challenging, but in fact it was a really good exercise. So I thought, well, the obvious thing to do is to put in some rests. So that's why the piece starts with a chord, and then there's a whole bar of silence. And then there's another chord, and then there's another whole bar of silence. And then I wanted to put more silence in, but it wasn't so easy to do that throughout the piece, but I thought if I do it in the very beginning, it sort of gives it a mysterious air, and it's a good way to start the piece. And then at the very end, there's a bar of silence again, as it sort of tapers off. There's a chord which sounds a bit like the end, but it isn't. And then there's a bar of silence, and then there's the last chord. I also thought about silence in terms of with friendships. How can you put silence and friendship together as themes in a piece of music? Well, I thought about the idea that when you're with a friend, the best way to be a good friend is to listen. So you have to remain silent yourself in order to listen to your friend. So I tried to also put in some question and answer movement happening. So there's bars where the choir is singing something and then the instrumentalists copy that because they're listening, they're silent, they're listening to the choir, and then they echo the same chord back, and they sort of have this back and forth conversation where they're listening to each other, having moments of silence, and answering each other.
It's really interesting. So can you walk us through the process of the piece? Were there any challenges?
Yeah, the process, I started off, the very first thing I had to do was to find a text to set. When I am a choral composer, so I set poetry or liturgy, prayers or hymns, and I wanted the perfect text that was going to talk about all these Quaker values and themes, but also talk about the renovation of this beautiful old building, and to sort of incorporate the fact that we are memorializing Ian Austen. And so I did a lot of research I looked into Quaker poetry. It's very nice Quaker poetry. I realized after doing a lot of research that there really wasn't any suitable text out there that was going to be suitable. So I thought to myself, well, come on, Victoria, you are an English major as well. So I used to write poetry. I just haven't written it in a long time. And I thought, maybe I could write my own poem. So I did sit down, and I did eventually come up with the poem that is now set to music. And it's about old and new, the old building having a new renovation, old friendships, which actually reflects my friendship with Matthew, because we've known each other since we were 11 or 12, because we started together at senior school. It was Holy Trinity School in Crawley. And so old friendships that have lasted a long time, but also the idea of new friendships. So the idea that a new building will bring people together who will be able to nurture their friendships. So that went into the poem. There is actually a reference to Ian Austen in the poem. He is the cherished soul. So if you hear in the very first verse the words cherished soul, that is my reference to Ian Austen. A cherished soul records. It's about this house. This old house has its own memories imbued in it, imbued in the walls. You know, if you believe in the spirit, the idea of spirits, old spirits and new spirits, and so it's a sort of the idea that although this is new, this is also an old place that harbours the memory of Ian Austen, just as the school cherishes the memory of Ian Austen as well. So I worked really hard on the poem, and I came up with three verses. The other process was making the verses very singable. So I was making sure that they were nice rhythms. That's the other thing about writing my own poem. I was able to actually make it just as singable as I wanted it. Sometimes I have to work with poetry that's difficult to set to music. There might be difficult words, might be odd lines that don't really fit rhythmically very well. So when I was writing this, not only was I thinking of the words themselves, but I was thinking of the rhythm and the lilt and the timing of each line and how it would work well in phrases. So it was actually nice to have the ability to create this poem for the music. And it's also, I chose to do 3 verses because it's a nice balanced number. You can start with the first verse, which is sort of the introduction. Then you can go into the second verse, which is it changes key and heightens the tension and heightens the, it's sort of like the bridge, if you like, of the song. And then the third verse takes us back by repeating some of the themes, musical themes of the first verse, so it sort of brings us back and rounds it off and concludes it at the end.
That's really interesting. I think you answered about half my questions.
I'm sorry.
What emotions or what do you want the audience to feel when listening?
Yes. Oh, that's a good question. There are several different emotions I hope that will be conveyed. Primarily the emotion of joy, because this is a joyful occasion. But also I'm hoping that some of the little chords I put in might tweak a little bit of just more sort of nostalgia, not sadness, but just a sort of nostalgia for the, there are some reverent moments because we're mentioning Ian Austen's, memory. I just want it to be sort of a little bit lump in the throat, perhaps. I'm not sure. I've not gone overboard on that. But, I did think about the mood and the emotion ought to be joyful, like, something along the lines of composers who have written for coronations. There are specific types of music that are written for opening ceremonies or for processing down the aisle of a church, coming into a church for a special occasion, or coming into any building for a special occasion. So I wanted to make it sort of a little bit, I wouldn't say pomp and circumstance, but I did have Elgar's pomp and circumstance sort of mood in my mind, and I thought let's make it joyful like that. But also Elgar's pomp and circumstance has joyful moments, but also very serene moments with the slow melody. So I wanted it to be overall joyful with some perhaps slightly emotional, moving moments.
That's really nice. I forgot to ask, where's your background as a composer?
Okay, right. So I grew up in England. I actually lived in England until I was 24 years old. And I was at Holy Trinity School, which is where I met Matthew. But I was taking private lessons. I was since the age of 4, I started taking piano lessons, and then at age 8, I started taking flute lessons. And I went to the West Sussex Music Centre from the age of 8 to 14. And then at age 14, I got a scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music in London. But it was just the junior academy. I mean, it was still quite an achievement to get there, but it was a weekend thing. So I went to Holy Trinity School during the week, and then at the weekends, from age 14 to 18, I went to the Royal Academy of Music and did the junior program there. So I had my flute lessons there, piano lessons, singing lessons, and composition and theory. So that's really when I started learning how to compose, theory. Although I was also learning theory with my private piano teacher. So I got grade 5 theory. I got my grade 8 on piano and flute by the time I took my grade 8 when I was 13 on the flute and 14 on the piano. So I'd already done grade 5 and grade 8 theory. And then I decided I was going to take a music A-level as well. So I studied music A-level at Holy Trinity, and that alongside continuing studies at the Royal Academy really enabled me to learn all the skills that I needed to learn for classical music composing. And then I continued on at Cambridge, at Clare College, Cambridge. I initially got in there to do music, but I was quite a little bit burnt out from music at that time, so I actually switched to studying English literature, but I continued my music career through performing and composing. I was particularly interested in choral music because I've always sung in choirs since I was very small, and just wanted to, I had the opportunity to write some choral music for Holy Trinity School when I was about 15, 16. I wrote some things. I wrote Christmas carols, I wrote hymns, and then I just continued on. And I won't go into the story of why I moved to America, but I did meet my husband at Cambridge, and he is American, and that's basically the reason I moved. But when I got to America, I was only 24, and the very first thing I wanted to do was find a choir. That would be my social life. So I joined a choir, and that choir went on a little bit, but then it disbanded. But then by that time I had lived in the US for 2 years, and I was starting to compose again, choral music. So I really wanted to gather together some singers, and so I actually formed my own choir in Chicago, and I called it Cantabile. That was my name for it. But after 2 years, I had established a board of directors, and we decided to change the names. We were doing quite well. We were getting grants and things from the local Chicago councils, and we decided to change the name to the Chicago Chamber Choir. And I continued to conduct for a little while until I had to step down, long story, and I handed the baton over. I was the artistic director, but I then handed it over to someone who could take it, because I was by then raising a family. I had a son who was autistic who needed me at home. So that's why I had to step down. But I continued on as composer in residence for the Chicago Chamber Choir, so I've been continuing to write for them. I did have a bit of a hiatus for a few years while I was raising my family. Second child came along, and they both needed me a lot. So I still did performances on flute and piano, but I didn't do so much composing until recently. I've just really started in the last 2 years getting back to composing again, because we're empty nesters now. Kids are off at college, at university. And so I've been looking to get back to commissions again. And then it all was wonderful timing. Matthew approached me with this wonderful project and said, would you be interested in a commission for my school? And then he told me the story about the opening of this new building, and he told me the whole story of Ian Austen. And I fell in love with the idea and thought, oh yes, I could really go to town on that. So that's, I suppose, how the...
So again, talking about the building itself,
Yes.
How did the purpose of the building influence the piece?
The purpose of the building being, you mean for a sixth form centre?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it wasn't so, I suppose the fact that this used to be a boarding house, right? Now it is going to be for study and for intellectual lectures and further enlightenment. So I was thinking, I also put in themes of light, and the idea of light can be lots of things. Light can be peace, light can also be goodness, but it can also be the light of education. So I was thinking about, that did actually come into it a little bit, the idea that it was a new educational establishment which will hopefully help students for future generations to come. And it was very exciting. So yes, I mean, that's definitely a factor.
And also, are there any symbols in the piece that kind of link towards the history or the future of the school or centre?
Let me think of the words of the poem. Yes. Well, again, the symbols, it's not too enigmatic. It's not, there aren't too many metaphors in it. It's mostly straightforward. But I suppose there are symbols of the shadows dancing on the walls, which sort of represent the spirits of the old, celebrating the fact that this is being repurposed for a new generation or new generations to come. So as shadows dance on newly painted walls, is one of the lines. This ancient house a cherished soul recalls. So it's, there's the symbol. Oh, that's right. I will remember this. This is probably relevant. Matthew shared a poem with me, which I wish I could recall word for word, but it's a poem by Thomas Hardy, and it was called I should have prepared this. It's called The Ancient House. I'll have to look it up. I think it's called The Ancient House. I can always reference it back and let you know for sure later. But he shared this poem with me that was really inspiring. And he said, even though this poem is not exactly right for the piece itself, it might give you some ideas of the sort of the mood that I want. Okay, so the poem, without quoting it, was about an artist looking down at an old empty building from a hilltop. So they're sitting under a tree, looking down at this old building. And the idea is that to the ordinary passerby, the building looks empty. But to the poet or the artist or the musician, the building is anything but empty. They say, if you look closely, if you still your mind and become silent, you will see the spirits dancing inside, the old spirits of the building. And that's actually where I got the idea of the shadows dancing on the wall, on the newly painted walls. So I wanted to get that idea of the spiritual element of our connection to the past. So, yeah, that's probably a good example.
And did that poem influence the name of the piece?
No, well, I suppose, let's see, I came up with The Sacred Places just because I wanted, it's the very last line of my poem. Friendship and silence find their sacred place is the very last line of my poem. That poem, the Thomas Hardy poem, didn't so much influence my title, but it was, I suppose that poem did have quite a lot of influence on my writing of the poem, with my poem. So I suppose in an indirect way, it probably, yes, it linked through, yes.
Yeah. And just finally, do you have any hopes for how the school is going to take the poem?
Oh, yes. Future? Well, I mean, I don't want to sound, I don't know. I would absolutely love if this piece of music, with its poem, that is set to music.
Sorry, poem.
No, it's fine. It is a poem. It is absolutely a poem that can stand on its own, but it's also set to music. And that's actually a good point, because I want, it could be taken on its own. It could be set to a different music at some point. But I'm hoping that this song, or this piece, or whatever you want to call it, I wrote it to be enjoyable and accessible so that it might be performed again in the future, not just for today. I'm hoping that it will become part of the choir's repertoire. Like I said, I don't want to sound grandiose and sort of, pompous or boastful or anything, but it would be so lovely, because I did ask Matthew, does the school have its own song? And, like an anthem or something. And the answer, I think that because of the Quaker principles and values, there isn't so much emphasis on having a school song. It's not part of the tradition. But I was thinking that because this is written specifically for Leighton Park School, specifically for this occasion, for this building, and it incorporates the Quaker values and it incorporates the memory of this special person, it's probably, hopefully, a very meaningful song that the school hopefully could take on as, if not their official anthem, but at least something in their repertoire that this school could use again in the future. And it has a history to this day. And again, without being pompous about it, it would be my greatest honour if the school would incorporate this into their repertoire and enjoy it. I mean, just again, I made it nice to listen to. I didn't make it too, modern or, atonal. So I wanted it to be anthem-like, hymn-like, memorable, and enjoyable for the students to both perform and listen to, and so hopefully be part of future generations here, because I am incredibly honoured to be, to have learned a lot about Leighton Park School. I honestly didn't know anything about Leighton Park School before, even though I knew Matthew, and I knew Matthew was working here. I educated myself about Leighton Park School before writing this piece. I read your website from almost cover to cover. I read the history. I watched a lot of videos from the website. So I watched some of your musicians performing. I also read up about not just music, but all the other parts of the school. And I was so excited and honoured to be asked to do something for this school. It really is an amazing honour. So yes, my hope would be that I can give this as a gift to the school to use and enjoy for as long as you like.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
It's really enlightened us.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Thank you very much.
It really is an honour. Thank you.